My name is Megan Martinsen, and I'm the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Georgetown University. My talk, titled Infusing Critical Evaluation of Data Visualization in Open and Tool-centric Workshops, will walk you through an activity I use in workshops to help attendees begin to learn to critically engage with data visualization. Open workshops at Georgetown are our biggest and widest teaching opportunity, both in terms of attendance and audience makeup. Last academic year, we had 497 attendees, made up of an almost equal balance of faculty, staff, undergraduates, and graduate students. With such a wide audience, we knew that it was a valuable opportunity to have learning objectives beyond just mastering the basics of the tool. I knew I wanted attendees to workshops to be able to critically evaluate a data visualization and identify basic best practices for creating a data visualization. To achieve that learning goal and still keep things fun, since people were at these workshops voluntarily, I created a game to play at every open workshop. I call the game, "What's Wrong with This Graph?" But really, we also use it with maps. Starting with a predecessor's library of bad examples that she would occasionally show in workshops, I added more examples and turned them into a game. Here's how it works. First, I find a few examples of bad graphs or maps related to the topic of the workshop. For more tool-focused workshops, I typically only show 2 or 3 graphs. In a more method-based workshop, like our popular data visualization for total beginners, I'll devote more time to the game and show 9 or 10 examples. During the session, I'll show the bad graphs and ask workshop attendees to tell me what's wrong with it. If I'm teaching in person, I have people shout out their answers, or if it's an online session, the Zoom chat works well too. Once students have identified what's wrong, I'll show them a fixed version of the graph, if that's possible, showing what the visualization would have looked like if basic best practices were followed. This allows me to briefly discuss best practices, and then I'll call back to those throughout the rest of the workshop. For example, in a mapping session, I will typically show a map that shows poor colors for colorblind readability. Then in the session, when we get to the section of picking colors for our map, I'll ask students what some considerations are and ask them to remember what we learned from our bad map. Picking examples is one of the most fun parts of teaching with this activity. Here are some helpful hints for choosing. Make sure to pick really bad examples. Because this activity is done quickly, only taking a few minutes, this isn't a good time for graphs with subtle problems. You want them to be obvious. Also, pick real-world examples. There is a treasure trove of heinous graphs and maps out there, so be sure to pick something from the real world. I find this is much more impactful than just making a bad graph to illustrate a point. And I promise, no matter what best practice you want to focus on, there is a graph out there that didn't follow it. It's also a good idea to pick a visualization that has more than one problem. This also isn't hard. If it has one, it probably has a few, and this gives more students the opportunity to participate. Let's look at a few examples I like to use. This bar chart is a great example of not starting the y-axis at 0, a major violation of best practice. Here's that same data once it's been graphed appropriately. Sort of a different story. This one I use as an example of color palette choices. The red and green divergent palette would be a real challenge for any viewers with red-green color blindness. And for this map, because the focus of the map was picking accessible colors, instead of fixing the map with a new palette, I showed this simulation of red-green color blindness, so students without color blindness get a sense of the accessibility issue. This one is a great example of misusing icons in charts. If you're going to have discrete objects making up a bar in your chart, each object needs to correspond to a set unit. As you can see, that's not happening here. Here's that same data graphed without icons. Again, sort of a different story. Thank you for your time and attention. The What's Wrong with This Graph activity has been a fun way to increase critical engagement with data visualization in our open workshops, and I hope it might be a good fit for your learning objectives as well.